Hello and welcome to our morning edition of Arirang News. We begin with these stories making the headlines at this hour. South Korean lawmakers began a National Assembly hearing this morning regarding the massive data breach at e-commerce giant Coupang. But the company's founder, Kim Bum-seok, did not attend the hearing, citing business commitments. National Security Advisor Ri Sung-nak has arrived in Washington and said he plans to discuss Seoul's push to build nuclear-powered submarines with U.S. officials. Ri is also seeking to discuss the possibility of restarting talks with North Korea. And the South Korean film No Other Choice, directed by Park Chan-wook, has been named a preliminary nominee for an Oscar in the International Feature Film category. Meanwhile, the song Golden from Netflix animated hit K-pop Demon Hunters was also shortlisted for Best Original Song. We begin this morning with a National Assembly hearing that's just begun into one of South Korea's largest ever personal data breaches, involving e-commerce giant Coupang and the leaking of information belonging to millions of users. But with the company's founder refusing to appear, questions are already being raised about accountability. Our Buniran has the latest.
South Korea's National Assembly opened a hearing on Wednesday into the massive data breach at e-commerce giant Coupang, which exposed the personal information of an estimated 33.7 million users. The hearing is being held by the Assembly's Science, ICT, Broadcasting and Communications Committee amid concerns that it may fall short of public expectations. Coupang founder and chairman Kim Bum-seok, along with former CEO Park Dae-jun, were summoned as witnesses, but both are absent. Kim submitted a written explanation citing overseas residence and global business commitments, while Park resigned just a week before the hearing. Kim's continued absence has renewed criticism over gaps in Assembly oversight, as his foreign nationality makes it difficult to deliver a summons or enforce compulsory attendance orders. In response, the Democratic Party lawmaker has proposed an amendment to the National Assembly's testimony law, allowing lawmakers to request an entry ban on foreign witnesses who refuse to attend hearings without a valid reason. Instead of Kim and Park, newly appointed Coupang executives, including its new U.S. national CEO, are attending, fueling criticism that senior decision-makers are once again avoiding direct accountability. The committee also added the CEO of Coupang Eats Services to the witness list just one day before the hearing. Lawmakers are expected to question executives on how the breach occurred, the company's data security practices, internal oversight, and who should ultimately bear responsibility. They will also examine whether Coupang's systems and response were adequate given the scale of the leak. A month on, anxiety among users remains high, with many reporting suspicious phone calls and messages, raising fears that leaked data is already being used for scams. A separate National Assembly petition is also gaining traction, calling for Kim's permanent entry ban into South Korea. Despite the breach, Coupang has limited its response to basic prevention guidelines and simplified account deletion, without announcing a concrete compensation plan. With public trust on the line, pressure is mounting on Coupang to move beyond explanations and present a clear plan for accountability and customer compensation. 문혜련, Arirang News.
Top security advisor Ri Sung-nak has arrived in the U.S. and announced that he would discuss concluding a separate agreement with Washington to building nuclear-powered submarines. He also expressed a strong commitment to bilateral cooperation and said that now is the opportunity for a dialogue with North Korea. Our Lee Seung-jae has more.
National Security Advisor Ri Sung-nak arrived in Washington, D.C. on Tuesday for talks on the implementation of agreements reached by the leaders of South Korea and the United States and strengthening coordination on North Korea policy. Speaking to reporters, he raised the possibility of a separate South Korea-U.S. agreement related to the construction of nuclear-powered submarines. Asked what such an agreement could look like, Wee pointed to Australia as an example.
Australia was granted an exception under Section 91 of the U.S. Atomic Energy Act, and that would require a separate agreement between the two countries. We may also need that, so we will discuss the possibility.
We suggested South Korea could similarly explore a separate agreement with Washington that would allow it to work around restrictions in the existing South Korea-U.S. nuclear cooperation agreement, which prohibits the military use of nuclear materials. We said it remains unclear whether the two sides will announce the creation of a formal consultative body on nuclear-powered submarines. While there is no agreement to establish issue-specific working groups, he said both sides are seeking ways to speed up consultations. We also emphasized close policy coordination on North Korea. He said he does not believe the issue is low on Washington's list of priorities, adding that while Seoul has made progress in stabilizing relations with regional powers, inter-Korean relations have lagged, and now there is an opportunity to make progress.
Isn't it true that a favourable atmosphere has formed between South Korea and the US among its various allies? If it's an opportunity, it's an opportunity. With this, North Korea relations must also be managed well. Therefore, coordination and cooperation between South Korea and the US are always crucial.
Wee is also scheduled to visit New York for talks with United Nations officials before returning to South Korea. Lee Seung-jae, Arirang News.
So the National Security Advisor is in Washington for follow-up talks on the joint fact sheet, outlining details of trade and security agreements between the two countries. For more on this, we're joined today by Matthew David Jenkins, an associate professor at the Department of Political Science at Gyeongsang National University. Professor Jenkins, thanks for joining us this morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
So the National Security Advisor Lee Seong-nak said he would discuss concluding a separate agreement with Washington to build nuclear-powered submarines. How do you think the talks will play out?
Yeah, so under existing agreements, the 123 agreement, Korea is not allowed to use nuclear fuel for military purposes. So they're going to have to figure out a way to make an agreement that allows Korea to do that. I expect that the details will be pretty technical, highly technical, and not something that's going to be any major announcements coming soon. But I think that a bigger issue underlying this, though, is where they're going to build the submarine. Korea is going on the assumption that it's going to be built in Korea. The United States is going on the assumption that it's going to be built in the United States, right, in the Philadelphia shipyard. So I think that will be another sticking point that it would be great to see if they can move forward on that to figure out where it's actually going to be built. So.
Right, and as part of a joint venture aimed at strengthening supply chain ties between Seoul and Washington, Korea Zinc will build a $7 billion plant in the United States, to produce key metals and minerals. And many analysts see this as a U.S. effort to sort of form critical mineral partnerships that are not dependent on China. Could this also be on the agenda when we is in Washington, and what's your take on this?
Yeah, I actually think this is less about the decoupling strategy, like trying to move away from the Chinese supply chain networks. I think this is, from the U.S. perspective, it's more about kind of a way of pursuing industrial policy domestically, right, to show that America is going to increase its manufacturing sector, right, and to actually start to build things again. That's a part of that supply chain, right, a part of that process. So that's kind of how I see it from the United States perspective. Like, for comparison, the United States also concluded an agreement with Japan, which is a much more extensive agreement that covers a variety of rare earth minerals, and that's sort of more of a better example of that. So I think from the U.S. perspective, yeah, it's more about domestic policy. And from the Korean perspective, it's about showing compliance, right? Showing almost like an over-compliance, right? In order to, sort of shore up its relationship with the United States. Perhaps from Korea's perspective, it could use this as leverage in further negotiations for different topics, such as the topic like the submarine issue there, the nuclear fuel agreement. And so that's kind of how I would see it from Korea's perspective, rather than seeing it. I mean, certainly it is going to contribute to the U.S.'s strategic move away from the Chinese supply chain, but I see it as more of a limited diplomatic move from Korea's perspective, and a more of a domestic policy move from the United States perspective.
I see. And regarding North Korea, the Trump administration repeatedly said, it hopes to resume face-to-face diplomacy with Kim Jong-un. And Wee is seeking to discuss this issue while he's in Washington. What are your thoughts on the possibility of talks between Pyongyang and Washington?
Yeah, I would say not a huge chance of that happening right at the moment. It certainly is possible. Both the United States and Pyongyang want some kind of process. They would love to have to show that they are engaging and making progress on the issue. From the U.S. perspective, right, they want to make progress on the denuclearization issue. From the North Korea perspective, they want recognition, improve their diplomatic status internationally. But I just don't see a great need right now. North Korea has since 2018, right? In 2018, that was a much different situation. Denuclearization was still more of was more potential for that. And right now, North Korea has pretty much abandoned that, and having nuclear weapons is a fundamental part of the regime's legitimacy. And so I think the two are inseparable. And so I don't see much like progress in that respect, even though formally, right, the United States is that's the main reason to have dialogue with North Korea, right, is to get nuclear weapons out of the peninsula. So given that's a pretty big gap, right? And I don't see that, I don't see much room for progress. Maybe there might be some superficial sort of like announcement of working level talk, like lower level meetings and things like this, just to show that we haven't forgotten about this issue, right? But I don't see much happening. From Korea's perspective, I would think that this is, Korea doesn't want to be left out, right? They were kind of like more of a passive partner in the 2018 talks. And they were sort of forced to accept whatever came out of those meetings. And so I would hope that Mr. Wee would use this as an opportunity to sort of shape the agenda and make sure that Korea is at least included in those whatever discussions happen, that it shapes it some way.
Right, and the Korean government also said that it will focus on resuming dialogue with North Korea next year. What's your take on the prospects for inter-Korean talks?
Yeah, so similar situation here, except that, Korea kind of needs these talks, or, in a sense, right? North Korea doesn't really need them as much. I mean, obviously, diplomacy with South Korea is important, but North Korea has moved, closer to Russia, closer to China. Again, as I said earlier, abandoned the idea of getting rid of nuclear weapons, and so it's unclear what North Korea has to gain from engaging with South Korea in a real, like, substantive way. On the other side, South Korea would certainly love to make some progress in bridging the gap between the two countries, particularly in the context of the Russia-Ukraine war, right? And North Korea deploying troops, and these kinds of issues are, right, kind of reaching not a boiling point, but certainly creating tension. And so it would love to relieve that tension. But I would say that, North Korea is probably like, I don't really care. I'm not so interested, right? So again, similar thing, right? There might be symbolic, like low-level talks, but I would be pretty surprised if they announce like major, like high-level summits at this point.
Right. I guess we'll have to see how that goes. All right, Professor Jenkins, thank you so much for your insight today. We appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
The Lee Jae-myung administration is continuing its live policy briefings after the president explained his decision to air the briefings live following mixed reactions. Our presidential office correspondent Song Yoo-jin reports.
As government ministries and agencies enter the second week of policy progress briefings now being broadcast live for the first time, President Lee Jae-myung says change may bring friction, but it is worth the effort.
공무원들 입장에서는 새로운 방식에 익숙하지 않을 수도 있고 또 예년과 같은 형태로 업무 보고하면 아마 편할 수도 있을 겁니다. 그런데 정책 과정이 투명하게 검증돼야 되고 또 그 과정에서 집단 지성이 모여야 정책에 대한 신뢰도도.
Lee made the remarks at Tuesday's cabinet meeting as opinions remain divided over the live broadcast. Supporters say the move strengthens transparency and the public's right to know, while critics argue it risks turning policy reviews into excessive discipline or public shaming. Appearing to address those concerns, the president said the new format reflects his administration's principle that the government exists to serve the people.
국정이 이 국정의 주체인 국민들에게 투명하게 공개돼야 국민 중심 국정 운영이라는 게 말에 그치지 않고 제대로 될 수가 있습니다.
On Tuesday, the Culture Ministry held its policy briefing alongside the Ministries of Health and Food and Drug Safety. President Lee stressed the importance of the arm's-length principle in the government's relationship with the arts.
일부는 또 각광을 받긴 하지만 압도적 다수는 그러지 못한 게 또 현실입니다. 개인적인 삶으로 끝나는 게 아니고 공공 영역에 영향을 미치고 사람들의 삶을 풍요롭게 풍족하게 만들죠. 그리고 세세하게 정말 구석구석 지원하되 간섭하지 않으면서도.
In line with this, the Culture Ministry plans to strengthen livelihood support measures for artists, such as offering low-interest, small loans. 송유진, Arirang News.
Now, on the economic front, a survey of business activities is a key indicator for corporate sales. Last year, the total sales of South Korean companies increased, driven by strong performance in the chip industry. Our An Sung-jin has the details.
Earnings for South Korean companies in 2024 increased on the back of a semiconductor boom. According to the Data Ministry on Tuesday, total sales from the 2024 survey of business activities, made up of nearly 15,000 companies and excludes the financial and insurance sector, reached 3,371.1 trillion won, or 2.28 trillion US dollars. That's a 5.2% increase from the year before. In particular, net profit before corporate tax surged by 20.6%. An official from the Data Ministry said that the chip industry, which suffered a downturn in 2023, played a key role in pushing the figure before corporate tax amid the global AI boom. The Trade Ministry had earlier stated that South Korea's semiconductor exports totaled $141.9 billion last year, the highest level on record. Average sales per company also rose. By industry, sales saw a hike in scientific and technical services, transportation and warehousing, and accommodation and food services. Meanwhile, sales declined in construction and the electricity and gas supply sector. An Sung-jin, Arirang News.
A South Korean private space company is set to attempt its first commercial rocket launch early Thursday. Innospace will launch its small rocket Hanbin-naru from Brazil's Alcantara Space Center, carrying a payload of 5 mini-satellites and 3 other instruments to an altitude of about 300 kilometers above the Earth. If successful, it'll mark the first time a South Korean private firm has placed customer satellites into a low Earth orbit. The launch will be live-streamed on YouTube, with the rocket expected to release its payload about 7.5 minutes after liftoff. Director Park Chan-wook's film No Other Choice has been named a preliminary nominee for an Oscar in the International Feature Film category. The Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences announced a shortlist for 12 categories on Tuesday, ahead of the 98th Academy Awards. In the International Feature Film category, 15 films were selected from submissions, representing 86 countries and regions, including South Korea. Also shortlisted was the song Golden from Netflix animated film K-pop Demon Hunters for Best Original Song. Final nominees will be announced on January 22nd, with the Academy Awards set to take place on March 15th.
Good morning, I'm Chu Ji-hyun, and this is The World Now. In the United States, Los Angeles prosecutors charged Nick Reiner, the son of filmmaker Rob Reiner, with 2 counts of first-degree murder in the killing of his parents. District Attorney Nathan Hochman announced the charges at a news conference on Tuesday, saying prosecutors will also pursue special circumstances for multiple murders and allege Reiner used a knife in the attack. Police found Rob Reiner and his wife Michelle Singer Reiner dead from apparent stab wounds inside their Los Angeles home on Sunday. Officers arrested Nick Reiner several hours later, and he is now being held without bail. He has not entered a plea, and authorities have not disclosed a motive. Director Reiner was best known for films such as When Harry Met Sally and A Few Good Men. Michelle Singer Reiner was a photographer and LGBTQ+ rights advocate. In Australia, newly released dashcam footage captured the final moments of a couple who confronted a gunman moments before the deadly mass shooting at Sydney's Bondi Beach. The footage released on Tuesday shows 69-year-old Boris Gurman wrestling a suspected attacker to the ground on Campbell Parade and briefly taking the gun as his wife, Sophia Gurman, stood nearby. CNN verified the video and confirmed the confrontation occurred just meters from where the shooter later opened fire at a Hanukkah event. Australian media identified the Gurmans as the first victims of the rampage that killed at least 15 people. Both died at the scene. Family members said the couple acted instinctively to protect others. Police later recovered an ISIS flag displayed on the attacker's vehicle. Authorities continue to investigate the attack. In the United States, newly released government data on Tuesday showed a sharp labor market slowdown, with layoffs creeping up and the hiring rate remaining at lows, similar to the pandemic and the aftermath of the Great Recession. The economy lost 105,000 jobs in October, but added 64,000 jobs in November. The unemployment rate in November rose to 4.6%, the highest level since 2021. Officials attributed the October losses largely to federal workforce reductions following Trump administration cutbacks. Economists also pointed to uncertainty from tariffs and persistently high interest rates. The Federal Reserve cut rates last week but signaled caution, with policymakers divided over further easing. In the United Kingdom, a Liverpool court on Tuesday sentenced a driver who plowed into a celebrating crowd to 21 years and 6 months in prison. Paul Doyle drove into a crowd during the May 26th parade celebrating Liverpool's Premier League title win. He injured more than 130 people before a bystander forced the vehicle to stop. Prosecutors said Doyle acted in rage after becoming stuck in traffic. The 54-year-old pleaded guilty to 31 charges, including dangerous driving and causing grievous bodily harm. The judge rejected Doyle's claim of panic and praised the bystander whose intervention prevented further injuries.
It was a rough morning commute for much of the capital area with damp roads and thick fog. And on top of that, stagnant air is trapping pollutants, making conditions even murkier. Ultrafine dust is expected to reach bad levels across the capital area throughout the day today. Rain or snow continue through the morning on Jeju, then to the east coast later today. Mountainous regions in Gangwon-do province could pick up 1 to 3 centimeters of snowfall. Morning temperatures were 2 to 5 degrees higher than yesterday, but daytime highs are lower in much places. Seoul getting up to 7 degrees, Gyeongju, Gwangju at 10 degrees under brighter skies in most places. Colder air moves back in overnight, bringing sub-zero temperatures tomorrow morning before rebounding to above the season norms. Then winter rain is expected across much of the country this weekend.
Now that's all we have for this morning. Arirang News will be back at noon Korea time. Thanks for watching.